The first thing you need to understand is that 5 of us went into the Laconia Galleria on the night of March 9th, and 4 of us came out, and the 4 of us who came out do not agree on what happened to the 5th. We agree on everything else. We agree on the sequence. We agree on the layout. We agree on what we found. We disagree on one point, and that disagreement is the reason I'm compiling this now, from 4 separate accounts, because if I only told you my version you wouldn't have the full picture, and the full picture is the only thing that might protect you. My name is Nora Kavanaugh. I was a reporter for the Laconia Register, which folded in 2019, and before that I covered commercial real estate and municipal zoning for 6 years. That's how I first came across the Galleria discrepancy in 2017. And that's how, eventually, I came to know the other 4. The Laconia Galleria is a 2-story indoor shopping complex in Laconia, New Hampshire. It was built in 1986, expanded in 1994, and by the time I started covering the zoning beat it was about 60% occupied. Standard decline story. Anchor tenants pulling out, dollar stores and vape shops filling the gaps, a food court with 9 slots and 3 operating vendors. Nothing unusual. Nothing worth writing about, except when the ownership group requested a tax reassessment, which is how the discrepancy surfaced. The reassessment filing listed the Galleria's leasable retail footage at 244,000 square feet. The original building permit, the 1994 expansion permit, and every previous tax document listed it at 228,000 square feet. 16,000 square feet of difference. That's not a rounding error. That's a department store. I pulled the county records, cross-referenced them with the Galleria's own published tenant directory, the one in the little glass case by the south entrance, and counted every occupied unit and every vacant unit, measured against the floor plan filed with the fire marshal's office. The floor plan accounted for 228,000 square feet. The reassessment claimed 244,000. I called the management company, Ridgeline Properties, and asked about the discrepancy. They said it was a clerical error and they'd file a correction. They never did. I wrote a short piece about it, zoning irregularities, tax implications, dry stuff, and moved on. But I kept a folder. Have it from the beat. When numbers don't match and someone tells you it's clerical, you keep the folder. 3 years later, the Register folded. I freelanced for a while, picked up work writing grant applications for nonprofits, and forgot about the Galleria entirely until I received an email in September of 2022 from a man named Dennis Eubank. Dennis had been the Galleria's operations manager from 2011 to 2018. He'd found my old article while searching for something else. He told me he'd been searching for any public record that mentioned the square footage discrepancy, because he'd spent the last 4 years trying to get someone to believe him about what occupied those extra 16,000 feet. We met at a diner in Tilton. Dennis was 54, careful, organized. He brought a binder. He told me he was not crazy and that he could prove it, and then he laid out 7 years of documentation. When Dennis started as operations manager in 2011, there were 41 units in the Galleria. He knew every one. His job was to coordinate maintenance, manage janitorial schedules, handle vendor complaints, and serve as the on-site liaison for Ridgeline Properties. Within the first month, he noticed that the janitors avoided a service corridor on the second floor, the one connecting the east wing to a set of utility rooms behind what used to be a Sears home. He asked why. They told him the corridor wasn't on their cleaning schedule. He checked. It wasn't. He asked Ridgeline why a 50-foot service corridor had been excluded from custodial maintenance. They told him the corridor was the responsibility of the tenant at its far end. There was no tenant at its far end. Dennis walked the corridor himself. It ended at a steel door with no unit number, no signage, and a lock he didn't have a key for. He put in a maintenance request to have the lock rekeyed. The request was returned marked tenant managed unit, no action. He asked Ridgeline who the tenant was. They gave him a name, Hargrove Specialty Goods. He looked it up in the lease directory. It wasn't there. He searched the county business registry. Nothing. He searched the state's LLC filings. Nothing. Dennis told me he would have dropped it, he had 41 other units to manage except for the announcements. The Galleria had a PA system. Standard setup, a Bogan system with a central console at the security office and ceiling-mounted speakers throughout. Dennis controlled it for emergency announcements, closing time notices, and occasional promotions the tenants paid for. He knew every announcement that went out, because he approved them. Starting in February of 2012, about 4 months into his tenure, the PA system began broadcasting announcements he hadn't approved. They were professional. Same cadence, same audio quality, same flat retail tone as every other announcement. They advertised Hargrove Specialty Goods. They said things like, "Attention Galleria shoppers, Hargrove Specialty Goods on Level 2 is now offering seasonal consultations. Visit us at the East Wing Service Access for personalized selections." Or, "Hargrove Specialty Goods reminds our valued customers that all fittings are by appointment. Please visit our East Wing location or inquire at the main directory." Dennis heard these himself. He checked the PA console. The announcements weren't queued in the system. There was no audio file, no scheduled playback, no record. He asked the security guards, there were 2 on shift at any given time, whether they'd heard them. One said yes. One said he wasn't sure. Dennis asked the tenants. 3 of them confirmed they'd heard announcements for a store they didn't recognize. None of them had thought it was strange enough to ask about. This is the part that Dennis emphasized, and I want to emphasize it to you now. The announcements were not frightening. They were not distorted, not whispered, not ominous. They sounded exactly like every other retail PA announcement you've ever heard while shopping. That was the problem. They fit so seamlessly into the sonic texture of the Galleria that most people process them the way you process any mall announcement, as background. You'd have to be specifically listening to catch that the store they referenced didn't exist. Dennis was specifically listening. Over the next 6 years, he logged 114 announcements for Hargrove Specialty Goods. He wrote down the date, the time, the exact wording, and who else was present. He kept the log in the binder he brought to the diner. I have the binder now. The entries are meticulous. The handwriting is steady. There is nothing in that binder that suggests a man losing his grip. What the binder also contains are maintenance records, utility reports, and email printouts. The utility reports show that the electrical draw on the second-floor East Wing circuit consistently exceeded what the occupied units there should have been pulling. Not enormously. About 15% above baseline. Enough to indicate that something behind that steel door was powered and running. The maintenance records show that Dennis submitted 4 separate requests to access the unit over 6 years. All 4 were returned with the same note, tenant managed unit, no action. The email printouts show 3 messages Dennis sent to Ridgeline's regional office asking for the lease agreement for Hargrove Specialty Goods. He received 1 reply, from an assistant named Colleen, which read, "Hi Dennis, Hargrove is a legacy tenant with a direct agreement predating current management. We don't have their file on hand. I'll follow up." She never did. Dennis forwarded 2 follow-ups. No response. In 2018, Dennis quit. Not because of Hargrove specifically. Ridgeline had cut his hours and he'd found a better position, but he told me the Hargrove situation had worn on him in a way he couldn't articulate well. He said it was like having a room in your house that your landlord insists is someone else's, and you can hear activity through the wall, but you're told it's not your concern, and eventually the thing that disturbs you isn't the room, it's how easily everyone else accepts the explanation. After Dennis contacted me, I began looking into the Galleria more seriously. I pulled every available record, building permits, fire inspections, tax filings, utility accounts, the original 1986 construction documents, the 1994 expansion plans. The 1994 expansion added a food court and 12 new units to the East Wing. The plans, signed by a firm called Kettner Associates out of Concord, showed the expansion terminating at the utility rooms Dennis had described. There was no unit beyond the service corridor. But the as-built survey, the document filed after construction was actually completed, reflecting what was really built versus what was planned, showed an additional 16,400 square feet of enclosed, climate-controlled retail space accessible through that corridor, with its own electrical panel, its own HVAC tie-in, and its own water line. The as-built was signed by a different surveyor than the one who'd done the original plans. His name was Gerald Hargrove. The surveyor who certified the as-built and the supposed tenant had the same name. I searched for Gerald Hargrove. I found him. He was not hard to find. He had a current address in Laconia, a valid surveyor's license on file with the state, inactive since 2009, and a landline phone number listed in the white pages. I did not call him. Not yet. Because by that point, 2 more people had contacted me. The first was a woman named Yolanda Cifuentes. Yolanda had worked at a shoe store in the Galleria from 2014 to 2016. She'd emailed me after finding the same old zoning article Dennis had found. I'd reposted it on a personal blog when the register's archives went offline. Yolanda told me she'd seen customers come out of the East Wing service corridor. Not maintenance workers. Customers. Carrying bags. Small, brown paper bags with no logo, no print, sealed at the top with a strip of unmarked tape. She saw this on at least a dozen occasions. The customers were calm. They didn't look confused or lost. They walked out of the corridor, through the second-floor common area, and left the building. Yolanda once asked a woman coming out of the corridor what store was back there. The woman looked at her, smiled, and said, "Hargrove's. They're very good." Then she left. Yolanda asked her manager about it. Her manager said she didn't know anything about a store in the service corridor. Yolanda let it go. She told me she let it go because the customers seemed fine and the answer she'd received seemed honest and it didn't feel like her business. She said the reason she was contacting me now, 6 years later, was that she'd recently seen the same brown paper bags in a completely different context. Her mother, who lived in Manchester, had died in August of 2022. While cleaning out her mother's house, Yolanda found 11 of the bags in a bedroom closet, still sealed with the same unmarked tape. She opened one. Inside was a small glass vial, about the size of a perfume sample, containing a clear liquid with no label. She opened all 11. All contained identical vials. She didn't know what the liquid was. She hadn't had it tested. But she knew the bags. She'd watched people carry them out of a corridor in a mall for 2 years. Her mother had never mentioned the Galleria. Her mother lived 40 minutes away and, as far as Yolanda knew, had never shopped there. The second person who contacted me was Marco Reyes. Marco had been one of the 2 security guards on Dennis's shift from 2012 to 2014. He was the one who'd confirmed hearing the announcements. Marco had quit in 2014 after an incident he'd never reported. The incident was this: one night in November 2014, during a routine sweep after closing, Marco walked the East Wing second floor and found the steel door at the end of the service corridor standing open. The lights inside were on. He could see a room. He described it as a retail space, not large, maybe 20 by 30 feet of visible floor, with built-in wooden shelving along the walls, a glass display counter, and a wooden floor. Clean. Well-maintained. Warmly lit. It looked, he said, like a high-end apothecary or a small curated gift shop. There was a man standing behind the counter. The man was in his 60s. Neat. Wearing a collared shirt and an apron. He looked up at Marco and said, "I'm sorry, we're closed for the evening. But I can put you on the appointment list if you'd like." Marco said he stood there for about 5 seconds, said nothing, turned around, walked back to the security office, and sat there until his shift ended. He did not report it. He did not go back. He told me that the reason he didn't report it was not that he was afraid. He said the room looked normal. The man looked normal. What frightened him was that it all looked exactly like it belonged there, and he knew it didn't, and he couldn't reconcile those 2 things, so he left. He put in his 2 weeks the following Monday. I now had 4 sources, my own records, Dennis, Yolanda, and Marco. 4 people with no connection to each other, spanning 7 years, all describing the same thing: a functional retail operation inside the Laconia Galleria that appeared in no directory, no lease, and no business registry, but which had its own infrastructure, its own announcements, its own customers, and a specific man running it. Gerald Hargrove. The fifth person was someone I found myself. His name was Philip Kenner. Philip was a building inspector for the county. He conducted the Galleria's most recent fire safety inspection in 2021. I contacted him through a public records request. I asked for the inspection report, and when I saw that it listed only the standard 41 units with no mention of additional space, I called his office and asked to speak with him. Philip was initially reluctant. He told me the inspection had been routine and complete. I asked him whether he'd accessed the East Wing service corridor. There was a long pause. Then he said, "That corridor terminates at utility infrastructure. There's no occupiable space beyond it." I asked him if he'd personally walked to the end of the corridor and confirmed that. Another pause. Then he said, "I'm going to need you to file a formal inquiry if you want to continue this line of questioning." Then he hung up. I filed the inquiry. It went nowhere. But 2 weeks later, Philip called me from a personal number and asked to meet. We met at the same diner in Tilton. Philip told me he had walked the corridor during his 2021 inspection. He told me the steel door had been closed but unlocked. He told me he'd opened it and found, behind it, exactly what Marco had described: a clean, well-lit retail space with wooden shelving, a glass counter, and a wooden floor. It was empty. No one was inside. But it was stocked. The shelves held rows of small glass vials, identical to the ones Yolanda had described, arranged neatly and unlabeled. The display counter held a leather appointment book, open to a page of handwritten names and dates. Philip said he'd read some of the names. He recognized 3 of them. They were people from Laconia. One was a city councilwoman. One was the principal of his daughter's school. One was his own mother. He closed the book. He left the room. He closed the door. He filed his inspection report with no mention of the space. He told me he did this because he didn't know what to do and he was afraid that if he documented it, he'd be asked to explain what he'd found, and he didn't have an explanation, and his professional credibility depended on having explanations. I want to be careful here, because I know what this sounds like. It sounds like 5 people constructing a shared delusion, or 5 people being manipulated by a con artist running an unlicensed business in rented space. I considered both possibilities. I considered them seriously. The con artist theory is the easiest to accept, and I'll tell you right now that it's partially correct. Gerald Hargrove was a real man running a real operation in a real space. There is nothing supernatural about the existence of the room. There is nothing supernatural about the vials. The thing that cannot be explained, the thing I need you to understand, is what the vials did, and what Gerald Hargrove knew about the people who came to buy them, and how he knew it, and what happened when we went in to get the appointment book. We met as a group for the first time in January of 2023. All 5 of us. My apartment in Laconia. We sat around my kitchen table and pooled everything we had. Dennis brought his binder. Yolanda brought 2 of her mother's vials. Marco brought his memory, which was precise and uncontaminated. He'd told no one about that night until he contacted me, and his account hadn't shifted in any detail across 3 separate tellings. Philip brought a printed copy of the as-built survey and a set of hand-drawn notes he'd made after his inspection, including a partial list of names he'd memorized from the appointment book. The names. That was the thing that changed the shape of the conversation. Philip had remembered 19 names. We cross-referenced them. 7 were people we could identify: the councilwoman, the school principal, Philip's mother, a local dentist, a retired letter carrier, the owner of a hardware store on Main Street, and a woman named Alice Crane who had died in 2019. All of them were Laconia residents. All of them were over 50. Dennis knew 3 of them personally. Yolanda's mother had known Alice Crane. Dennis asked the obvious question: what were they buying? Yolanda had the vials. She'd opened one in front of us. The liquid inside was clear, slightly viscous, with no scent. She'd brought it to a pharmacy and asked a pharmacist friend to look at it informally. The friend had said it appeared to be a saline solution with a very low concentration of something organic she couldn't identify without a lab analysis. Yolanda hadn't pursued the lab analysis because she wasn't sure she wanted a formal record of the question. Marco said, "We need to go in." That was the moment the conversation divided into two halves. The first half, the half that had taken 8 months, from Dennis's first email to me through the pooling of evidence, had been about establishing what existed. The second half was about deciding what to do. And in the second half, the dynamic was different from anything I expected. There was no argument about whether the room was real. Everyone at that table accepted it. There was no argument about whether Gerald Hargrove was a real person. He was. The argument was about what we were walking into and whether we had any right or reason to walk into it. Philip said we should contact the police. Dennis said the police would need a reason, and there's an unlicensed shop in a mall wasn't going to generate the kind of response we wanted. Yolanda said she wanted to know what her mother had been buying and why, and she wanted the appointment book because it might tell her how long her mother had been going there and what she'd been getting. Marco said he wanted to confront Gerald Hargrove directly, face to face, and ask him what he was selling and under what authority. I wanted the book too. The journalist in me knew the book was the primary document. It was the record. If it contained names, dates, and transaction details for an unlicensed operation selling unidentified substances to elderly residents, it was evidence. It was a story. It was also, potentially, something Philip needed in order to file an amended inspection report and protect his career. We decided to go in together. All 5. Not at night, we weren't breaking in. The Galleria was still open. We'd go during business hours, walk the service corridor together, and knock on the door. If it was open, we'd enter. If Hargrove was there, we'd ask our questions. If the appointment book was accessible, we'd document it. Marco and Dennis both had prior professional access to the building. Philip had inspection authority. Yolanda and I were members of the public with legitimate questions about a business operating in a commercial space. Nothing we planned was illegal. We went on March 9, 2023. A Thursday. The Galleria was quiet mid-afternoon on a weekday. We parked in the south lot and entered together. Dennis led, because he knew the layout best. We took the escalator to the second floor, walked the east wing past a closed payless and an operating nail salon, and turned into the service corridor. It was exactly as Dennis and Marco had described it. Fluorescent lit, clean, maybe 50 feet long, ending at a steel door with no signage. Our footsteps echoed on the concrete floor. No one spoke. I remember Yolanda walking close to my shoulder and Philip falling a few steps behind, checking the walls as if conducting an inspection by reflex. Dennis stopped at the door. He knocked. 3 knocks. Evenly spaced. From inside, a man's voice said, "Come in." Dennis opened the door. The room was as Marco and Philip had described it. Wooden shelves along 3 walls, lined with glass vials in neat rows. A glass display counter near the back. Warm overhead lighting, not the fluorescent buzz of the corridor but a soft, amber incandescence that felt residential. The floor was hardwood, clean and waxed. It smelled, faintly, like cedar and something else I couldn't place. Something mineral. Like the air near a hot spring. Behind the counter stood Gerald Hargrove. He was older than I'd expected from Marco's description, mid-70s at least, but upright, composed, with close-cut white hair and rimless glasses. He wore a dark green apron over a white shirt. His hands were resting on the countertop, and he was looking at us without surprise. 5, he said. That's unusual. I typically see people one at a time. Dennis said, "Mr. Hargrove, we need to ask you some questions about your operation here." "Of course," Hargrove said. "But I should tell you that I only serve by appointment, and none of you are on my list." He glanced down at the counter, where the leather appointment book was open. Although, he paused. He lifted one finger and turned a page. "Yolanda. Your mother was a client. I was sorry to hear about her passing. She was consistent for 11 years. Yolanda stiffened beside me. She didn't say anything. What did you sell her? I asked. Hargrove looked at me. His expression was patient. Not evasive. Not nervous. Patient, like a shopkeeper being asked about a product line by someone who didn't understand the merchandise. I don't sell anything, he said. I provide a service. People come to me when they've lost something they can't describe, and I help them identify it and hold it steady. The vials are a medium. A carrying mechanism. What's inside is specific to the person. What's inside? Philip said. Clarity, Hargrove said. Not metaphorically. I mean the actual biochemical correlate of a resolved emotional state. It's different for each person. I formulate it here. The process takes about an hour per session. People come monthly, usually. Some more often near the end. Near the end of what? Dennis asked. Their lives, Hargrove said. It was not said coldly. It was said the way a pharmacist would say their prescription cycle. Factually. Most of my clients are in their last decade. Not because I select for age. Because the thing they've lost, the clarity, tends to erode most acutely in the final years. They find me when they need me. I've never advertised. You broadcast announcements on the PA system, Dennis said. Hargrove tilted his head slightly. I don't control the announcements. The building makes those. It has since the expansion. I didn't ask for it. The building, he paused, as if choosing his words. The building integrated my presence into its systems. I didn't install anything. I occupied the space, and the space acknowledged me. That may be difficult to accept. Marco stepped forward. I saw you in 2014. You told me you were closed. I was closed. You came after hours. You shouldn't exist, Marco said. His voice was steady but tight. This space isn't on any lease. You're not in any registry. You filed the as-built survey that created this room on paper. You built yourself into the building's records before you moved in. That's fraud. Yes, Hargrove said. That part is fraud. I needed a space, and I created one inside the documentation so I could occupy it undisturbed. The surveying was my career before this. I knew how to make a space exist on paper in a way that would be administratively invisible, too embedded to question, too small to audit. That was intentional. That was the only deceptive part. The only deceptive part, Philip repeated. The rest is genuine. The service is real. The formulations are real. The people who come to me come voluntarily and leave better than they arrived. I have never harmed anyone. I have operated here for 29 years, and in that time I have served over 400 people, and not one of them has ever filed a complaint or reported an adverse effect. I understand that this is irregular. I understand that it raises questions. But I need you to consider the possibility that some things operate outside of licensing frameworks because the frameworks weren't built to accommodate them. This was the moment I want you to focus on, because this is where the five of us diverged, not from each other, but from the narrative we'd built. We had come in expecting confrontation. We had come in expecting evasion, or hostility, or an empty room, or a con artist scrambling for cover. What we got was a composed man giving clear, direct answers that were internally consistent and externally impossible. And the impossible part was not the room or the vials or the 29 years. The impossible part was what he did next. He looked at Yolanda and said, "Your mother's formulation was for the loss of her first son. Not you. The boy before you, who was stillborn in 1971. She carried that grief her entire life without resolution, and it was destroying her sleep, her digestion, and her capacity to feel safe in enclosed spaces. I didn't cure it. I isolated the neurological pattern of the unresolved grief and provided a counterbalancing agent she could administer sublingually. Once a month. It gave her approximately 3 weeks of clarity before the pattern reasserted itself. That's why she came monthly. Yolanda's face went white. She told me later, not in the moment, but hours later, at my kitchen table, that she had never known about a stillborn brother. She called her aunt that night. Her aunt confirmed it. A boy, stillborn in 1971, never spoken about. Her mother had carried it silently for 51 years. Hargrove looked at Philip. Your mother's formulation is for a different pattern. I won't discuss it without her consent. But you should know she's been coming here since 2008, and she's better for it. You've noticed the change. You attributed it to the new medication her doctor prescribed. It wasn't the medication. Philip sat down. There was no chair. He sat on the floor, his back against the shelving, and put his hands on his knees. No one helped him up because no one knew what to do. Hargrove looked at Dennis. You were never a client and neither was anyone you love. You found me because you're meticulous and because my presence bothered your sense of order. I respect that. You have no personal stake in this room. You can leave and lose nothing. He looked at Marco. You either. Then he looked at me. And he said, "You're here for the book." I said yes. The book contains the names, dates, and formulation notes of every person I've served since 1994. If you take it and publish it, you'll expose 400 people's most private griefs to public scrutiny. Their families will learn things they were never told. Some of those families will be damaged. Some of those people are still alive. Some of their formulations are still active. If the formulations are interrupted, if the people who depend on them lose access, the patterns will reassert. For some of them, at their age, the reassertion will be catastrophic. Not metaphorically. Medically. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I said I did. Then you have a choice, he said. And I'm not going to make it for you. I don't threaten. I don't hide. You found me, and I'm answering you honestly. The book is on the counter. You can take it. I won't stop you. But I need you to decide with full understanding of what happens next. I want to tell you that I hesitated because of the ethical weight of the decision. That's partly true. But the real reason I hesitated is that I believed him. Not in a mystical, overpowered way. I believed him the way you believe a mechanic who shows you exactly what's wrong with your engine and doesn't upsell you. He was calm. He was specific. The details he'd given about Yolanda's mother were verifiable and verified. The claim about Philip's mother was testable. He wasn't performing. He was disclosing. Dennis spoke first. This is an unlicensed medical operation. Whatever the outcomes, whatever the intentions, you're administering unregulated substances to elderly people without oversight. That's not a gray area. You're correct, Hargrove said. Then it has to stop. If it stops, the people who depend on it will suffer. Some of them will die sooner than they otherwise would. Not from withdrawal. From the return of what I was holding at bay. You understand that I'm not guessing about this. I've watched it happen twice, when clients stopped coming. The pattern returns within 6 weeks. It's not gentle. Marco said, that's not our responsibility. No, Hargrove said. It isn't. But you're the ones making the decision, so it's your knowledge. Here is where the 5 of us split. Dennis and Marco wanted to take the book and report the operation to the state health department. Their reasoning was clear, grounded, and defensible. An unregulated, unlicensed individual was compounding and administering substances to vulnerable people in a concealed facility. Regardless of his claims about efficacy, the potential for harm was unacceptable and the lack of oversight was illegal. Yolanda wanted the book but didn't want it published. She wanted to read her mother's entries. She wanted to understand what her mother had been carrying. She wanted to close something personal. She was not interested in shutting down the operation. Her mother had gone willingly for 11 years and had, apparently, been helped. Philip was sitting on the floor. He wanted to talk to his mother before he did anything. He said he wasn't going to make a decision about something that affected her without asking her first. I wanted the book. I wanted the story. I also wanted to believe that the story was simple: fraud, exposure, justice, and it was becoming clear that it wasn't simple. But I didn't think the complexity was a reason to walk away. I thought it was a reason to be more careful, not less. We argued. Not loudly. We were standing in this man's shop and he was watching us with the patience of someone who had been expecting this for a long time. Yolanda and Philip on one side, wanting restraint and time. Dennis and Marco on the other, wanting action and accountability. Me in the middle, wanting the document and not yet sure what I'd do with it. It was Marco who moved first. He walked to the counter, picked up the appointment book, and put it inside his jacket. Hargrove watched him do it. He didn't move. He didn't object. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them and said, "Then I'll need to close. It will take me a few hours. I'd ask that you leave so I can do it properly. The formulations need to be disposed of in a specific order." "We're not leaving you alone to destroy evidence," Dennis said. "I'm not destroying evidence. The evidence is in your friend's jacket. I'm disposing of biochemical materials that can't be left unattended. Some of them are personalized to specific neurological patterns. If the wrong person ingests the wrong formulation, the result won't be clarity. It will be the opposite." Dennis looked at me. I nodded. It seemed reasonable, or at least, it seemed more dangerous to insist on staying in a room full of unidentified compounds than to let the man dispose of them. We turned to leave. All 5 of us. Marco first, with the book. Then Dennis. Then me. Then Yolanda. Philip was still on the floor. "Philip," I said. "Let's go." He looked up at me. Then he looked at Hargrove. "What's my mother's formulation for?" "I told you. I won't discuss it without her consent. She's 78. She might not. I need to know if she's safe." Hargrove studied him for a moment. Then he walked around the counter, crouched down to Philip's level, and said something to him quietly. I didn't hear it. None of us heard it. Philip's face changed, not dramatically, not like a movie revelation, but in the way a face changes when something you suspected is confirmed and the confirmation is worse than the suspicion. Philip stood up. He said, "I'm staying. I need to talk to him." Philip. Dennis started. "Go. Take the book. I'll be out in an hour." We left. The 4 of us walked back through the service corridor, down the escalator, through the Galleria's south entrance, and into the parking lot. Marco had the book. The sun was setting. It was cold. We sat in Dennis's car and waited. Philip didn't come out. After an hour, Dennis went back in. He walked the corridor. The steel door was locked. He knocked. No answer. He called Philip's phone. It rang, unanswered. He called it again. Same result. He came back to the car and told us. We waited another hour. Then Marco went in with Dennis. The door was still locked. They pounded on it. Nothing. Marco called 911 and reported a missing person in the Galleria. 2 officers arrived. Dennis explained that their friend had entered a unit in the East Wing service corridor and hadn't come out. The officers walked the corridor. They tried the door. Locked. They called Galleria management. A night manager arrived with a master key. The key didn't work. The lock wasn't on the building's master system. The manager said he didn't know what unit was behind the door. He said it wasn't in his records. The officers called for a locksmith. The locksmith arrived at 9 p.m. and opened the door. The room behind it was empty. Completely empty. No shelving. No counter. No vials. No wooden floor, just concrete slab, same as the corridor. No lighting fixtures. No wiring. The HVAC vent was sealed with a metal plate. There was a thin layer of dust on the floor, uniform and undisturbed. No footprints. No marks. The room looked like it had been unoccupied for years. Philip was not inside. The officers filed a missing persons report. We gave statements. I did not mention the appointment book. Neither did Marco. Neither did Dennis or Yolanda. We said our friend had entered the corridor and not returned. We said we believed he'd gone into the room. The officers noted the empty room and the dust in the sealed vent and concluded that Philip had likely left through a different exit and wasn't answering his phone. They listed him as a voluntary missing adult. The case went nowhere. Philip Kenner has not been seen since March 9, 2023. His phone has never been recovered. His car was in the south lot. His mother, when we eventually contacted her, Dennis did it, gently, carefully, said she didn't know what we were talking about. She said she'd never heard of Hargrove Specialty Goods. She said Philip was traveling for work and would be back soon. She said this every time anyone has asked, for over 3 years. Philip's mother is 81 now. She is, by all external appearances, doing very well. That's the thing we disagree about. Dennis believes Philip is dead. He believes Hargrove killed him or caused his disappearance when we took the book, and that the room was dismantled and concealed to eliminate evidence. He believes the entire operation was an elaborate, long-running fraud that exploited elderly people's grief and loneliness, and that the specificity of Hargrove's knowledge about Yolanda's mother, about the stillborn child, was the result of research and social engineering, not any genuine capability. He believes we should have taken Philip with us by force, and that our failure to do so makes us partially responsible for whatever happened to him. Marco agrees with Dennis on every point except the mechanism. Marco doesn't think Hargrove killed Philip. Marco thinks the room did something, he doesn't claim to know what, and that Hargrove's warning about the formulations being personalized and dangerous was true, and that whatever Philip's mother's formulation was designed to suppress was the thing that Philip asked about, and that the knowledge of it was not something Philip could carry back out with him. Marco says this isn't supernatural. He says it's toxicological, neurological, something with a mechanism we don't understand but that operates on the body, not outside it. He says the room was real and functional and that its emptiness when the locksmith opened it means either the room has a second exit we didn't find or the dust and the emptiness were staged in the hours between our departure and the locksmith's arrival. Yolanda believes Philip chose to stay. She points out that Hargrove didn't prevent any of us from leaving. She points out that Philip refused to come with us. She believes Philip learned something about his mother's condition, something Hargrove whispered to him, that made him decide to stay and protect his mother's access to the formulation, even if it meant we'd lose contact with him. She believes Philip is still alive, somewhere inside whatever Hargrove's operation actually is, and that his mother's continued well-being is evidence that the formulation is still being provided. She doesn't think this is good. She thinks Philip made a choice under duress, with incomplete information, in a state of emotional shock. But she believes it was his choice, and she believes he'd make it again. I'm the fourth account. Here's what I believe. I believe Gerald Hargrove was telling the truth about everything except one thing. I believe the formulations were real. I believe the service was real. I believe 400 people received something that helped them, and I believe the help was genuine, and I believe Hargrove did not see himself as a predator. The one thing I believe he lied about was the announcements. He said the building made them. He said he didn't control them. I think that was the only moment he deflected, and I think the reason he deflected is that the announcements were the one part of his operation that wasn't for his existing clients. The announcements were for recruitment. They were targeted. They played when specific people were in the building, people whose neurological patterns Hargrove could detect or identify by some means I don't understand. The announcements were invitations, personalized and precisely timed, embedded in the ambient sound of the Galleria so they'd be heard only by the person they were meant for. Everyone else heard mole noise. I believe this because of what I found in the appointment book. Marco gave it to me. We agreed I was the best person to analyze it. I've spent the last 3 years going through it. It contains 412 entries spanning from 1994 to 2023. Each entry includes a name, a date of first appointment, a frequency of visits, a brief description of the pattern being treated, Hargrove's word, and a formulation code. The descriptions are clinical and intimate. They describe griefs, traumas, fears, and cognitive erosions with a specificity that implies not just knowledge but direct perception. Things no intake form would capture. Things no interview would surface. Things the clients themselves, in many cases, didn't have language for. And in the margin of each entry, in pencil, there's a date. A single date, different for each person. I cross-referenced the first 60 dates with public records. In every single case, the date in the margin is the date that person died. For the people who were still alive when the book was taken, the dates are in the future. 12 of those future dates have now passed. In all 12 cases, the person died on the date written in Gerald Hargrove's margin. I haven't published this. I'm not going to publish it in the register or in any outlet that would require editorial oversight, sourcing standards, or legal review, because the book would be confiscated and the names would become public and the families would be exposed and the thing Hargrove warned about, the damage, would happen exactly as he described. So I'm putting it here instead. In this format. Where it's a story. Where no one has to believe it, and no one will pull the thread hard enough to find the book, and the people in it are protected by the assumption that I made this up. There are 41 names in the appointment book with future dates still unresolved. 41 people who are currently alive, who are being treated by a man who no longer operates, in a room that no longer exists, for conditions that will now go untreated. I check the obituaries every week. The dates are holding. And there's one more thing. 3 months ago, in January, I was grocery shopping at a market basket in Tilton. Mid-afternoon. A weekday. The store was mostly empty. I was in the cereal aisle when I heard, over the store's PA system, mixed in with the ambient music and the call for a cleanup on aisle 9, a flat, professional voice say, "Attention shoppers, Hargrove Specialty Goods is now accepting new consultations. If you've been referred, please inquire at the service desk for your appointment time." I stood very still. No one around me reacted. The stock boy at the end of the aisle kept scanning boxes. The woman behind me kept loading her cart. I walked to the service desk. I asked the teenager working there if they'd heard an announcement about specialty goods. He looked at me blankly and said, "We just had the cleanup call." That's it. I left my cart in the aisle and drove home. I have not gone back to that market basket. I don't know if the announcement was for me. I don't know if Gerald Hargrove is alive, or relocated, or something else. I don't know if the room that disappeared from the Galleria has reappeared somewhere in a grocery store's back offices, integrated into a new building's infrastructure the way it was integrated into the old one. But I know the voice. I know the cadence. And I know that I've been having trouble sleeping since November, and that my mother died when I was 6 and I've never once dreamed about her, and that the absence of those dreams has started to feel, recently, like a wall, like something installed in me a long time ago that keeps a specific grief from reaching the surface, and I know that Gerald Hargrove looked at me across that counter and saw it, and said nothing about it, because I wasn't there as a client. I was there as a threat. But I'm not a threat anymore. The book is in a safe deposit box. The story is here, where no one has to act on it. Hargrove's operation, wherever it is none of my concern. I'm just having trouble sleeping. And last Tuesday, at the post office, I heard it again. I didn't go to the service desk. I picked up my package and left. But I sat in my car for a long time before I started the engine, because the announcement had included a detail it hadn't included before. After the standard language about consultations and referrals and appointment times, the voice had added, "Nora, your mother's name was Helen. The pattern began the morning you were told. You were eating cereal. You've avoided that aisle ever since, in every store, without knowing why. We can discuss this whenever you're ready. I drive to a different post office now. But I still haven't thrown away the note I wrote to myself that afternoon, sitting in the parking lot, in my own handwriting, in a hand that was shaking. What was the cereal? Because I don't remember. I was 6. I don't remember the morning I was told my mother died. I don't remember what I was eating. I don't remember the kitchen. I don't remember the table. And I didn't know, until that announcement, that there was anything to remember. I thought the grief was processed. I thought it was done. I thought the wall was just the normal way a 6-year-old absorbs the worst thing that's ever happened to her and gets on with her life. But Hargrove says it's a pattern. And the pattern has a start point. And the start point is a bowl of cereal in a kitchen I can't see, on a morning.